Get off my plane. We don't fly people like you in first class." Those were the words Captain Silas Thorne shouted at a quiet woman in Seat 1A, convinced she was a nobody trying to scam a free ride. He thought he was the god of the skies. He thought his seniority made him untouchable. But he made one fatal mistake. He didn't check the passenger manifest, and he certainly didn't check the news. Because the woman he was dragging off the flight wasn't just a passenger. She was Eleanor Bishop, and she had just bought the entire airline that morning. What happens next isn't just justice, it's total destruction. The blizzard outside John F. Kennedy International Airport was historic. It was the kind of November snow that turned New York City into a grey, slushy parking lot and turned the departures board into a sea of red delayed text. Inside Terminal 4, the air smelled of stale coffee, damp wool and anxiety. Elena Bishop stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Pinnacle Air Lounge, watching the ground crews battle the ice. At 42, Elena was a ghost in the corporate world. She wasn't the type to flash her wealth on Instagram or give flashy interviews. She was a fixer. She bought failing companies, gutted the corruption, and rebuilt them into empires. Today she was wearing a faded grey hoodie, black leggings, and a pair of worn-out sneakers. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she wore oversized reading glasses. To the untrained eye, she looked like a tired graduate student, or perhaps a nanny, traveling home for the holidays. No one looked at her. No one offered her champagne. The lounge staff, busy fawning over a man in a tailored suit near the bar, had completely bypassed her table for 40 minutes. Elena didn't mind. She was observing. She pulled out her phone and checked the stock ticker, Pinnacle Air, PNA. The acquisition had been finalized privately at 4:00 a.m. in a boardroom in Geneva. As of right now, she owned 51% of the company. The public announcement wouldn't drop for another 12 hours. She was flying to London Heathrow on Flight 909, Pinnacle's flagship route, to see exactly why this airline was losing $200 million a quarter. "Excuse me," Elena said softly, flagging down a passing attendant named Jessica. "Could I get some sparkling water, please?" Jessica didn't even stop walking. She just pointed vaguely toward the self-service fridge. "It's over there, sweetie. We're prioritizing platinum members right now." Elena glanced at the ticket in her hand. It was a platinum first-class ticket. She had paid $14,000 for it out of her own pocket to avoid alerting the board. But Jessica had looked at Elena's hoodie and skin color and made a calculation. She doesn't belong. Elena smiled, a small, dangerous curl of the lips. "Noted," she whispered, typing a note into her phone. "Staff Jessica, location JFK Lounge. Issue profilings on negligence." The announcement chimed overhead. "Pinnacle Air Flight 909 to London Heathrow is now boarding Group 1 and first-class passengers at Gate B32. Elena grabbed her beat-up leather duffel bag, which actually cost more than Jessica's car, though it didn't look like it, and headed for the gate. The gate area was a war zone. Angry passengers were shouting about delays. The gate agents looked overwhelmed. As Elena approached the priority lane, a tall man with a red face and a cheap suit cut in front of her. "Move it," the man grunted, shouldering past her. "Priority lane." Elena kept her footing, her core tight. "I'm in this lane too, sir." The man laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Cleaning crew boards later, honey. This is for first class." Elena said nothing. She stepped up to the podium. The gate agent, a harried man named Greg, didn't look up. "Boarding pass." Elena scanned her phone. The machine beeped green. 1A. First class. Greg looked at the screen, then up at Elena, then back at the screen. He frowned. Hold on. He typed something into his keyboard. System says 1A. That's weird. Why is it weird? Elena asked, her voice calm but firm. Usually reserved for VIPs, Greg muttered, clearly confused by the juxtaposition of her attire and the ticket status. He looked her up and down, suspicion clouding his eyes. ID. She handed him her passport. He scrutinized it for a long time, bending it, checking the hologram, acting as if he were border control rather than a gate agent. Is there a problem, Greg? Elena asked. Just making sure it's yours, he snapped. He finally handed it back. Disappointed, he couldn't find a fault. Go ahead, but keep that bag under the seat. Overhead bins are full. In first class? Elena raised an eyebrow. The flight is half empty. Just do what you're told. Greg waved her off, turning his smile to the rude man in the suit behind her. Welcome aboard, Mr. Henderson. Right this way, sir. Elena walked down the jet bridge, the cold air seeping through the gaps. She felt that familiar burn in her chest, the one she had felt her whole life. The assumption of incompetence, the assumption of poverty. She entered the aircraft. The first-class cabin of the Boeing 777 was luxurious, bathed in soft blue LED lighting. Seat 1A was a private suite with a sliding door. She stowed her bag in the completely empty overhead bin and settled into the seat. She closed her eyes, preparing for the audit. She needed to see how the crew treated a nobody. She didn't have to wait long. Heavy footsteps thudded down the aisle. The smell of expensive, overpowering cologne filled the air. "Stewardess!" a booming voice called out. "Why is the temperature in here set to morgue? Fix it." Elena opened one eye. Standing in the galley, adjusting his gold-striped epaulets, was the captain. Captain Silas Thorne. He was a legend at Pinnacle Air, but for all the wrong reasons. He was 55, silver-haired, with a jawline that looked like it had been chiseled out of granite and an ego to match. He was the chief pilot of the fleet, the highest-paid employee below the C-suite. He was known for two things: his perfect landing record and his absolute tyranny over his crew. He turned, scanning the first-class cabin to ensure everything was to his liking. His eyes glossed over Mr. Henderson in 1F. They nodded at an elderly woman in 2A. Then his gaze landed on Eleanor in 1A. He stopped. The smooth professional mask dropped. His eyes narrowed into slits. He walked over to seat 1A, looming over her. "Excuse me," Thorne said. His voice wasn't asking. It was demanding. Elena looked up, adjusting her glasses. "Yes, Captain. Let me see your boarding pass." Elena didn't move. "I already showed it at the gate. And I'm asking to see it now," Thorne said, leaning closer. "Because I know the manifest. Seat 1A is usually reserved for board members or full-fare executive partners. And you—" he gestured vaguely at her hoodie. "You look like you're lost." The air in the cabin went still. The flight attendants, two women named Sarah and Chloe, froze in the galley. They knew that tone. Thorne was on a warpath. Elena slowly reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. She displayed the QR code. Thorne didn't even scan it. He just looked at the name. Elena Bishop. "Bishop," he muttered. "Don't know the name. Probably a system glitch. Upgrade with miles." "Paid cash," Elena said. Thorne laughed. It was a cruel, dismissive sound. "Right. Look, miss, I don't know how you got past Greg at the gate, but I run a tight ship. We have a senator boarding in 10 minutes who is on the standby list for this seat. I'm going to need you to move. Move where? Economy. Row 42 is open. Middle seat. Elena unbuckled her seatbelt, but she didn't stand up. She shifted her posture, sitting straighter. The tired graduate student vibe evaporated. In its place was the steel spine of a woman who had negotiated billion-dollar mergers, while men like Thorne were still figuring out how to tie their ties. "Captain Thorne," Elena said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming ice-cold. "I paid $14,000 for this seat. I have a valid contract of carriage with Pinnacle Air. I am not moving to row 42. And if you attempt to move me, you will be violating federal aviation regulations regarding passenger discrimination." Thorne's face turned a shade of purple, rarely seen in nature. He wasn't used to being told no. Especially not by women. Especially not by black women in hoodies. He keyed his radio, staring her dead in the eyes. "Security to the aircraft," Thorne snarled into the mic. "I have a disruptive passenger in 1A, refusing captain's orders. I want her removed now." The silence in the first-class cabin was deafening. Mr. Henderson, the rude man in the cheap suit, was filming the entire interaction on his phone, snickering. "About time they cleaned up the riffraff," Henderson muttered, loud enough for Elena to hear. Elena remained seated. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, but her face was a mask of stone. She had anticipated resistance, but she hadn't anticipated this level of blatant aggression. It wasn't just unprofessional, it was personal. Thorne felt insulted by her very presence in his domain. "You're making a mistake, Captain," Elena said calmly. "The only mistake," Thorne spat, checking his Rolex, "was letting you board. You're delaying my pushback, and nobody delays my pushback." 2 TSA agents and a Port Authority police officer. Officer Brady walked onto the plane. The snow was whipping into the cabin through the open door, lowering the temperature, making everyone shiver. "What's the problem here, Captain?" Officer Brady asked. He looked tired. "She's disruptive," Thorne lied smoothly. He pointed a manicured finger at Elena. "She's aggressive toward the flight crew. She's refusing to follow safety instructions, and I suspect her ticket is fraudulent. I want her off my plane immediately." Officer Brady looked at Elena. She was sitting with her hands folded in her lap. She looked about as aggressive as a librarian. "Ma'am," Brady asked. "I haven't raised my voice," Elena said clearly. "I haven't moved from my seat. I have a valid ticket. The captain is removing me because he doesn't like how I look." Thorne stepped in, using his height to intimidate the officer. "Are you going to argue with the pilot in command, officer, under maritime and aviation law? My word is final regarding the safety of this vessel. If I say she's a threat, she's a threat. Remove her, or I call your supervisor and tell him you're grounding a flight because you're scared of a girl." Brady sighed. He knew the law. The captain had absolute authority to deny boarding. Even if the captain was being a jerk, the police had to enforce the removal, and the passenger had to sue later. "Ma'am, you have to come with us," Brady said, his voice apologetic. "Don't make this harder than it has to be. Grab your bag." Elena looked at Thorne. He was smirking. It was a look of pure, unadulterated triumph. He had won. He had exerted his power and crushed the intruder. Elena stood up. She grabbed her leather duffel. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She turned to Sarah, the flight attendant, who was looking at the floor, ashamed. "Sarah," Elena said. Sarah looked up, startled. "Yes, ma'am. What is the flight number?" "AE 909, ma'am." And the tail number, N450PA, ma'am. Thank you. Elena walked past Thorne. As she passed him, she stopped for a fraction of a second. The smell of his cologne was nauseating. "Enjoy your flight, Captain," she whispered. "It will be your last." Thorne laughed out loud. "Get off my plane, sweetheart. Go back to coach where you belong." Eleanor walked up the aisle. Every head in first class turned to watch her go. Mr. Henderson waved his phone at her. "Smile for YouTube, lady." She walked out into the jet bridge, the cold biting her skin. The humiliation burned hot in her throat. Being marched off a plane by police like a criminal. It was the nightmare scenario. But as she walked up the ramp away from the plane, the sadness in her eyes hardened into something else. It hardened into strategy. Officer Brady walked her to the gate podium. "Look, miss, I'm sorry. He's a powerful guy. You can file a complaint with the airline customer service." Elena chuckled. It was a dark, dry sound. "Oh, I'm going to do a lot more than file a complaint, officer." She didn't leave the gate area. She stood right there at the podium while Greg, the gate agent, smirked at her. "Told you," Greg whispered to his colleague. "Fake ticket." Elena took out her phone. She didn't call customer service. She didn't call a lawyer. She dialed a number that very few people in the world possessed. It rang once. "Richard," Eleanor said into the phone. On the other end was Richard Sterling, the outgoing CEO of Pinnacle Air, the man who had just sold the company to her 6 hours ago. "Eleanor," Richard sounded confused. "I thought you were in the air. We have the transition meeting in London tomorrow." "I'm not in the air, Richard," Elena said, her voice carrying across the quiet gate area. "I'm standing at gate B32 at JFK. Your chief pilot, Silas Thorne, just had me arrested and removed from the plane." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, the kind of silence that precedes an explosion. He did what?" Richard stammered. "He removed me for being disruptive. He didn't like my hoodie, and he didn't like my skin." Elena watched through the window as the jet bridge pulled away from the plane. The aircraft was preparing to push back. "Richard, listen to me very carefully," Elena said. "I am exercising the emergency clause in our acquisition contract. I am taking operational control of Pinnacle Air, effective immediately. Not tomorrow. Now." "Eleanor, wait. Shut up, Richard. Connect me to the tower, and connect me to dispatch. Elena, you can't just— I own 51% of this fleet, Richard." Her voice finally rose, cracking like a whip. Heads turned at the gate. Greg stopped typing. "I want Flight 909 grounded. Do not let that plane take off. If Thorne pushes back from the gate, I will sue this entire board for gross negligence and bury this brand so deep you'll need a submarine to find it." "Okay," Richard said, his voice trembling. "Okay, Elena. I'm patching you through to the JFK Tower supervisor. Hold on." Elena lowered the phone, waiting for the connection. She looked out the window. The massive Boeing 777 was just starting to move. The tug was pushing it back. Thorne was in the cockpit, probably joking with his co-pilot, thinking he had cleared out the trash. Elena brought the phone back to her ear. "This is JFK Tower Control Supervisor Davies speaking. Who is this?" "This is Elena Bishop," she said, her voice projecting power that made Greg, the gate agent, stand up in alarm. "I am the owner and CEO of Pinnacle Air. I am issuing a code-red administrative stop on Flight 909. Revoke their takeoff clearance immediately." "Ma'am, I have no verification of—" "Check your system, Davies," she snapped. "Richard Sterling is on the line to authorize. Ground that plane. Now." Out on the tarmac, the Boeing 777 suddenly stopped moving. The brake lights flashed on. Elena watched a cold smile forming on her face. "Round one, Captain Thorne," she whispered. Inside the cockpit of Flight 909, Captain Silas Thorne was feeling excellent. He had just successfully exerted his dominance over a nuisance the cabin was secure, and he was cleared for pushback. He adjusted his headset, glancing at his first officer, a younger man named Mark, trying to log enough hours to eventually escape Thorne's shadow. "See that, Mark?" Thorne said, his voice dripping with condescension as he released the parking brake. "That's how you maintain command authority. You let one crack in the hull, the whole ship goes down. Never let them argue. You are the law." "Yes, Captain," Mark said quietly, though he looked uncomfortable. He had seen the woman. She hadn't seemed like a threat. She just seemed quiet. "Tower Pinnacle 909 ready for taxi." Thorne broadcasted, his voice smooth and practiced. The radio crackled. Usually the response was immediate clearance to the active runway, but this time there was static followed by a voice that sounded urgent and strangely strained. "Pinnacle 909, hold position immediately. Do not, I repeat, do not proceed to taxiway. Hold position." Thorne frowned, his brow furrowing. "Tower 909 holding." "What's the issue, traffic?" "Negative 909, the controller replied. "We have received a code red administrative stop order on your aircraft. You are to set parking brakes and hold for gate return instructions." Thorne blinked. He had been flying for 30 years. He had heard of mechanical holds, security holds, weather holds. But an administrative stop that came from corporate, that meant something was wrong with the paperwork, or the insurance, or the money. "Tower, clarify, code red." Thorne snapped, his patience evaporating. "We are fully boarded and on schedule. I have a slot to hit in London." "Captain, the order comes from the top. You are ordered to return to gate B32 immediately. Do not argue. Ground control is clearing the lane behind you." Thorne slammed his hand against the console. "Unbelievable. Probably some glitch in the manifest." He turned to Mark. "Tell the cabin we have a minor technical delay. Don't tell them we're going back to the gate. I don't want a riot." Thorne spun the huge aircraft around his face, burning with irritation. He taxied back toward the terminal, watching as the jet bridge, the same one he had just left, began to extend toward the plane again, like a welcoming arm. Inside the cabin, the mood shifted from annoyance to open hostility. "What is going on?" Mr. Henderson shouted from seat 1F, slapping his armrest. "Why are we stopping?" "Sarah." The flight attendant hurried down the aisle, her face pale. "I'm sorry, sir. The captain has been ordered to return to the gate. We don't have details yet." "This airline is a joke." Henderson groaned, pulling out his phone to tweet about it. "First you let riff-raff on, now you can't even fly the plane." The plane shuddered to a halt. The seatbelt sign pinged off. Thorne stormed out of the cockpit, ripping his headset off. He looked like a bull ready to charge. "Open the door," he barked at Sarah. "I want to know which idiot in operations cancelled my clearance." Sarah opened the cabin door. The cold wind swirled in again. But standing at the end of the jet bridge wasn't an operations intern. It wasn't a mechanic. It was David Chen, the station manager for all of JFK, a man who usually sat in a high tower office and never came down to the mud of the tarmac. He looked terrified. He was holding a tablet with trembling hands, and standing right next to him, hands in the pockets of her grey hoodie, was Elena Bishop. Thorne stopped dead in the galley. His eyes darted between David and Elena. His brain tried to make the connection, but his ego blocked the signal. "David," Thorne asked, confused. "What are you doing here, and why is she back?" He pointed a finger at Elena. "I had her removed. If she steps 1 foot on this aircraft, I'm calling the FBI." David Chen swallowed hard. He looked at Thorne with a mixture of pity and fear. "Captain Thorne, please step aside." "Step aside?" Thorne laughed, but it sounded hollow. "This is my ship, David. You don't tell me to step aside. And you definitely don't bring disruptive passengers back onto my flight after I kicked them off." Elena took a step forward. She didn't look at Thorne. She looked past him into the cabin, scanning the faces of the crew. "I'm not a passenger, Silas," Elena said. Her voice was conversational, almost bored. It was the voice of someone who had nothing left to prove. "Excuse me," Thorne bristled. "You have a ticket, you're a passenger, and currently you're a banned passenger." Elena turned her head slowly, locking eyes with him. The intensity of her gaze made Thorne take a subconscious half-step back. "David," Elena said, not breaking eye contact with the captain. "Read him the email." David cleared his throat. He held up the tablet. "Captain Thorne, this is a memo sent 5 minutes ago from the Board of Directors, copied to all station managers and chief pilots globally." Thorne crossed his arms. "I don't have time for memos. Summarize it." The subject line is acquisition and leadership change. David read his voice, gaining a little strength. "Effective immediately. Pinnacle Air has been acquired by the Bishop Venture Group. All executive decision-making power has been transferred to the new majority shareholder and acting CEO." David paused. He looked at the woman in the hoodie. Thorne's face went slack. The blood drained from his cheeks, leaving him looking grey and old. He looked at the hoodie. He looked at the sneakers. He looked at the face he had sneered at. "The new CEO." David finished, Ms. Elena Bishop. The silence that followed was heavier than the plane itself. Inside the first-class cabin, Mr. Henderson dropped his phone. It clattered onto the floor, the screen cracking, but he didn't move to pick it up. Sarah, the flight attendant, gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Elena stepped across the threshold of the aircraft. "You said you run a tight ship, Captain," Elena said, walking into the galley so she was inches from him. She was shorter than him, but in that moment she seemed 10 feet tall. "You said you know the manifest. You said seat 1A is for VIPs. Thorne opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He was watching his career burn down in real time, and he couldn't find the fire extinguisher. Thorne stammered. "Ms. Bishop, I didn't know." "You didn't check," Elena corrected him gently. "You saw a black woman in comfortable clothes, and you decided she wasn't worth your respect. You decided she was riff-raff. You decided to humiliate her to impress a cabin full of strangers." She brushed past him, her shoulder checking his arm, and walked into the first-class cabin. She stood at the front of the aisle. The passengers were staring at her with wide, saucer-like eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elena addressed the cabin. Her voice was projected calm and commanding. "My name is Elena Bishop. I am the new owner of this airline. I apologize for the delay." She pointed to seat 1A. "I'm going to take my seat now. We have a flight to catch. However, there is going to be a slight personnel change before we depart." She turned back to the galley, where Thorne was still standing frozen, looking like a statue of a man, realizing he was made of sand. "Captain Thorne," Elena said. "A word, please." The walk from the galley to seat 1A was less than 10 feet, But for Captain Silas Thorne, it felt like walking the Green Mile. He approached Elena, his hands shaking. He tried to muster some of his old arrogance, some of that pilot-in-command bravado. But it was gone. It had evaporated the moment he realized the power dynamic had shifted tectonically beneath his feet. "Miss Bishop," Thorne said, lowering his voice to a harsh whisper. "Look, we can discuss this in private. There's no need to make a scene in front of the passengers." "A scene?" Elena raised her eyebrows. She sat down in seat 1A, the seat he had dragged her out of 20 minutes ago. She buckled her seatbelt with a deliberate loud click. "You didn't mind making a scene when you had the police drag me off Silas. You seemed to enjoy the audience then. Mr. Henderson over there was filming it. Weren't you Mr. Henderson?" She looked at the man in 1F. Henderson shrank into his seat, trying to become invisible. I deleted it," he squeaked. "Good," Elena said. She turned her attention back to the captain. "You want to talk in private now? We are going to talk right here, because the culture of this airline is going to change, and it starts with transparency." "I was following protocol," Thorne lied, desperate now. Sweat was beading on his forehead. "I thought you were a security risk. You didn't fit the profile." "What profile is that?" Elena asked. She waited. The silence stretched, agonizing and thick. "The profile of someone wealthy. The profile of someone who matters." Thorne said nothing. He couldn't say it. To say it would be to admit the racism that had fueled his entire career. "Here is the reality, Captain," Elena said, pulling a document from her leather bag. It wasn't a ticket, it was a termination of contract form. She had printed it in the lounge, using the portable printer she always traveled with, just in case. She was always prepared. "You have violated 3 clauses of your employment contract," she listed, ticking them off on her fingers. "Gross misconduct, discrimination against a passenger, and interestingly enough, failure to perform pre-flight due diligence regarding the passenger manifest." She held out the pen. "I am relieving you of command, Captain Thorne, effective immediately." Thorne stared at the pen. You can't do this. I'm the chief pilot. You can't fire me on a plane. The union will eat you alive." "The union protects pilots, not tyrants," Elena said coolly. "And I'm not firing you on the plane. I'm suspending you. The firing happens tomorrow morning at 9:00 a.m. at the HR office. Right now, you are simply a passenger who is no longer qualified to fly this jet because his emotional state is compromised." "Who is going to fly the plane?" Thorne shouted, his voice cracking. "Mark. He's a baby. He can't command a heavy across the Atlantic in a snowstorm." "Actually," a voice came from the cockpit. Mark, the first officer, leaned out. He looked nervous, but there was a spark of defiance in his eyes. He had been bullied by Thorne for 3 years. He had watched Thorne belittle gate agents, flight attendants, and co-pilots. "I am type-rated for command captain," Mark said. "And the relief pilot, Captain Davis, is in the bunk. He can take the left seat. I can handle the right." Elena smiled at Mark. "Excellent. Captain Davis, please report to the cockpit." A groggy-looking pilot emerged from the crew rest area, buttoning his blazer. He assessed the situation quickly, saw the look on Thorne's face, saw the steel in Eleanor's eyes, and nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Elena turned back to Thorne. "Grab your bag, Silas." "And go where?" Thorne hissed. "You going to kick me off into the snow?" "No," Elena said. "I'm not cruel. I'm not you. We need to get to London. You can stay on the flight." Thorne let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. "Okay, fine. I'll take the jump seat in the cockpit." "Absolutely not," Elena said sharply. "The cockpit is for working crew. You are not working crew." She pointed a finger toward the back of the plane. The very back. Row 42 is open, Elena said, echoing his exact words from earlier. Middle seat, next to the lavatory. Thorne's jaw dropped. You cannot be serious. I am a captain. I do not sit in economy. You aren't a captain right now, Elena said, her voice dropping to that dangerous, icy whisper again. Right now, you are a non-revenue passenger on a probationary ticket. And if you refuse the seat assignment, I will have Officer Brady come back and drag you off for disrupting the flight. Your choice. The irony hit Thorne like a physical blow. The humiliation was total. It was absolute. He looked at the crew. Sarah and Chloe were trying desperately not to smile. He looked at the passengers. They were looking at him with a mix of shock and schadenfreude. Slowly, painfully, Captain Silas Thorne reached into the forward closet and retrieved his coat and bag. He stripped off his epaulets, the gold stripes of his authority, and stuffed them into his pocket. He began the long walk down the aisle. It was the longest walk of his life. He had to walk past the business-class passengers who whispered as he passed. He had to walk through the premium economy section where people stared. He reached economy. The cabin was packed hot and smelled of humanity. Babies were crying. He found row 42. It was indeed the last row, right against the rear galley wall, meaning the seat didn't recline. The toilet flushed in the lavatory behind him with a deafening roar. In the window seat was a teenager with headphones blasting music. In the aisle seat was a large man who was already asleep, his elbow encroaching on the middle space. Thorne squeezed into the middle seat. His knees hit the seat in front of him. He had no leg room. He had no power. He was just a man in a suit in the middle seat. Back in first class, Eleanor Bishop finally relaxed. She took a sip of the sparkling water Sarah had just brought her, served in a crystal glass with a slice of lemon this time. Ladies and gentlemen, Elena's voice came over the PA system, calm and professional. This is your CEO speaking. We have resolved the personnel issue. We anticipate a smooth flight to London. To apologize for the delay, I have authorized free Wi-Fi and premium beverages for the entire aircraft economy included. Thank you for flying Pinnacle. A cheer went up from the back of the plane. Elena put on her noise-cancelling headphones. She opened her laptop. She had an airline to fix. But the drama wasn't over. Because Silas Thorne wasn't the type of man to accept defeat. Sitting in row 42, squeezed between two strangers, he wasn't reflecting on his behavior. He was plotting. He pulled out his phone. He had connections. He had dirt on the old board. He typed a text to a contact named The Fixer. She humiliated me. I want her destroyed. Release the files on the merger. Dig up everything on Elena Bishop. The plane began to accelerate. The engines roared. As the wheels left the ground, the war for Pinnacle Air had truly begun. London was grey, weeping with rain that felt colder than the New York snow. Flight 909 touched down at Heathrow with a shudder. The landing was rough. Mark, the first officer, had done his best, but the crosswinds were brutal, and the absence of the seasoned Captain Thorne was felt in the mechanical jerk of the wheels hitting the tarmac. Inside the cabin, the passengers groaned, but Elena Bishop didn't flinch. She was already mentally in the boardroom. As the plane taxied to the gate, the ding of seatbelt signs turning off triggered a cacophony of belt buckles unclicking. But before anyone could stand, the PA system crackled. Ladies and gentlemen, Elena's voice was smooth. Please remain seated for just a moment longer. Port Authority police will be boarding the aircraft to escort a passenger off. Thank you for your patience." A murmur of confusion rippled through the plane. In row 42, Silas Thorne stiffened. He squeezed his hands into fists. He assumed she was arresting him again. Petty, he thought. She's terrified of what I know. But the police didn't come to row 42. They went to the cockpit. They escorted Mark and Captain Davis out, followed by Elena. They were clearing the path for her, treating her like a head of state. Thorne watched from the back, seething. He had to wait 20 minutes for the rest of the plane to deplane before he could drag his humiliated, cramped body out of the economy seat. His back screamed in protest. His legs were numb. When he finally stumbled into the terminal, blinking in the harsh fluorescent light, he expected to see Elena gloating, but she was gone. Instead, a man in a black trench coat was waiting for him near the baggage claim. He held a sign that simply read, "Thorne." Thorne approached him. "I'm Thorne." The man handed him a burner phone. "From Lord Harrington. He wants to speak with you. Now." Thorne took the phone, his heart racing. Lord Alastair Harrington was the chairman of the board for Pinnacle Air. He was the leader of the Old Guard, the group of investors who had opposed Elena's takeover, but had been outvoted by the sheer volume of her cash offer. Thorne dialed. "Silas." Harrington's voice was like crushed velvet, smooth, expensive, and suffocating. "I hear you had a rough flight." "She humiliated me, Alistair." Thorne spat, walking briskly toward the exit, ignoring the curious looks from his own flight crew, who were waiting for the crew bus. "She sat me in row 42. She violated every union protocol in the book." "Good," Harrington said. "That gives us ammunition. But we need more." "You said you have files. I have the maintenance logs from last quarter." Thorne lowered his voice, stepping out into the London rain. "The ones you told me to adjust. The ones about the engine stress tests." "Do not say that over the phone," Harrington snapped. "Bring them to me. Tonight. If Bishop finds those logs, she'll know we've been inflating the fleet's value by ignoring safety mandates. If she finds out, we all go to prison. But if we leak a story that she is the one cutting corners, that she fired a senior captain because he refused to fly an unsafe plane..." Thorne smiled. It was a wicked, crooked thing. "Then she looks like the villain, and I look like the hero who stood up for safety." "Exactly," Harrington said. "Get here. The board meeting is at 8:00 a.m. tomorrow. We are going to ambush her. By noon, Elena Bishop will be ousted, and you will be VP of Flight Operations." Thorne hung up. He hailed a black cab, feeling the power return to his veins. He wasn't just a pilot anymore. He was a kingmaker. Meanwhile, in the back of a bulletproof Mercedes Sprinter van, speeding toward Canary Wharf, Elena Bishop was looking at a laptop screen that was bleeding red. "Stock is down 4% in pre-market," said her assistant Marcus, who had met her at the airport. Marcus was young, brilliant, and the only person Elena trusted completely. Someone leaked a rumor that the acquisition was funded by cartel money. It's trending on Twitter, @PinnacleScam. Elena rubbed her temples. "It's Harrington. He's trying to tank the stock price so he can buy back control at a discount." "It's getting worse," Marcus said, scrolling. "There's a thread on Reddit from an anonymous pilot. Claims you fired the chief pilot mid-flight because he refused to fly a plane with a cracked windshield. Claims you put profits over safety." Elena laughed, a sharp, humorless bark. "Thorne. He's spinning the narrative. He was the one who bullied the crew, and now he's painting himself as the martyr for safety." "It's working," Marcus noted grimly. "The union is threatening a strike. The UK Aviation Authority just announced a surprise audit of the fleet. Elena, if they ground the fleet on your first day, you're done. The bankruptcy clauses will trigger, and the banks will seize your assets." Elena looked out the window at the blurry lights of London. She was tired. She hadn't slept in 24 hours. She was fighting a war on 3 fronts: the public, the board, and the government. "Take me to the hangar," Elena said suddenly. "The hangar?" Marcus asked. "The hotel is the other way. You have the board meeting at 8. "I need to see the maintenance records," Eleanor said, her eyes narrowing. Thorne was too confident. He didn't just hate me because I'm black. He hated me because I was looking. He was scared I'd find something. What could he be hiding? That's what we're going to find out. "Turn the car around." They drove to the Pinnacle maintenance hangar at Luton, an hour outside the city. It was a cavernous, freezing building, smelling of jet fuel and grease. Elena walked in, startling the night shift mechanics. She wasn't wearing a suit. She was still in her hoodie and leggings, though she had thrown a blazer over it. "I need the head mechanic," she announced. A burly man with oil-stained hands walked over. "That's me. Who are you?" "I'm the owner," Elena said. "Unlock the server room. I want the raw data from the engine health monitoring systems for the last 6 months. Not the reports you send to corporate. The raw download from the black boxes." The mechanic shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, those servers are restricted. Captain Thorne and Lord Harrington have the only keys." "I own the lock, the key, and the building," Elena said, stepping closer. "Open it or you're fired." The mechanic hesitated, then sighed. "Look, I just fixed the planes. I don't want trouble." He unlocked the door. Elena and Marcus spent the next 6 hours in the freezing server room. They combed through terabytes of data. At 4:00 a.m., Marcus gasped. "Elena, look at this." He pointed to a graph on the screen. It showed the exhaust gas temperature margins for the entire Boeing 707 fleet. "They're redlining," Elena whispered, horrified. "These engines are running 20 degrees hotter than the limit. They've been overboosting them to save fuel time, running them past their life cycle. It saves them about $40 million a year in maintenance," Marcus calculated. "But it turns the engines into ticking time bombs. If one of these blew over the Atlantic, it would be catastrophic," Elena finished. "Thorne signed off on this. See his digital signature. He's been falsifying the safety checks to hide the engine wear. Harrington was paying him a bonus to do it." She sat back, the cold realization washing over her. This wasn't just discrimination. This was criminal negligence on a massive scale. Thorne had tried to kick her off the plane, not just because of prejudice, but because he was terrified she would audit the books and find the ghost in the machine. "We have them," Marcus said, grinning. "We release this, and they go to jail." "No," Elena said, closing the laptop. "If we release this now, the airline gets grounded for months. The stock goes to zero. The company dies, and 5,000 people lose their jobs. I didn't buy this company to kill it." "So what do we do?" Elena stood up, stretching her stiff limbs. Her eyes were hard as diamonds. "We go to the board meeting, and we let them think they've won. I want them to say it on the record. I want them to dig their own graves." The boardroom of Pinnacle Air was located on the 45th floor of the Shard, overlooking the Thames. It was a room designed to intimidate. The table was mahogany 20 feet long. The chairs were leather. The men sitting in them were sharks. At 8:00 a.m. sharp, the doors opened. Elena walked in. She had finally changed. She was wearing a tailored white suit that looked like armor. Her hair was pulled back into a sleek, severe ponytail. She held nothing but a single folder. Lord Harrington sat at the head of the table. He didn't stand up. "Ms. Bishop," Harrington said, his voice dripping with fake politeness. "So kind of you to join us. I trust you've seen the morning news." He gestured to the large screen on the wall. CNN was playing a segment, "Pinnacle Chaos, New CEO Accused of Reckless Endangerment." "I've seen it," Elena said calmly. She took the seat at the opposite end of the table. "It's a disaster," said another board member, a heavy-set man named Sterling. "The stock is down 12%. The pilots are threatening to walk out. They say they won't fly for a CEO who disrespects the chain of command." "We have a witness," Harrington said, pressing a button on the intercom. "Send him in." The side door opened, and Silas Thorne walked in. He was wearing a fresh suit. He was clean-shaven. He looked every inch the hero pilot. He didn't look at Elena. He looked at the board members, nodding solemnly. "Captain Thorne," Harrington said, "please tell the board what happened on Flight 909. Thorne cleared his throat. He put on his best performance. "I was conducting pre-flight checks when Ms. Bishop boarded. She was erratic. She demanded special treatment. When I refused to upgrade her companion for free, she became belligerent. I tried to de-escalate, but she threatened my job. Then mid-flight, she stormed the cockpit and relieved me of duty because I refused to fly through a storm cell. She wanted to shortcut through to save time." A gasp went around the room. It was a lie so bold, so complete, that it was almost admirable. "She wanted to fly through a storm?" Harrington asked, feigning shock. "Yes, sir. I told her it was unsafe. She told me she owned the plane, and I was fired." Thorne looked at the floor, acting heartbroken. "I've given 30 years to this airline. Safety has always been my priority." Harrington turned to Elena. A shark-like grin spread across his face. "Well, Ms. Bishop, this is grave. Reckless endangerment. Abuse of power. Violating aviation safety laws. The bylaws of this company allow the board to remove a CEO for cause without severance if they endanger the brand." He slid a paper across the long table. "Sign your resignation, Elena. We'll issue a statement saying you stepped down for health reasons. We'll stabilize the stock. Thorne returns to chief pilot. Everyone walks away with their dignity." Elena looked at the paper. She looked at Thorne, who was finally looking at her, a smug smirk dancing on his lips. "I got you," his eyes said. "You thought you could beat the system." "I am the system." Elena picked up the paper. She looked at it for a long moment. The room was silent. Then she laughed. It was a soft laugh at first, then it grew louder. She dropped the paper on the floor. "You boys really are sloppy," Elena said. "Excuse me," Harrington bristled. "You think I came here unprepared?" Elena stood up. She opened her folder. "You think I bought an airline without knowing where the bodies were buried?" She pulled out a USB drive and plugged it into the room's projection system. The screen flickered. The CNN report vanished. In its place was a video. It was grainy, taken from a security camera. But the audio was crystal clear. It was the maintenance hangar. Last night. But not Elena's visit. This was a video from 3 months ago. On the screen, Silas Thorne was standing with Lord Harrington. They were standing next to an open turbine engine. Audio. Thorne. "The blades are cracking, Alistair. If we run them this hot, they're going to shear off. We need to overhaul the fleet." Harrington. "We can't afford an overhaul before the sale. The quarterly earnings have to look perfect, or Bishop won't buy. Just patch the logs. Override the sensors." Thorne. That's illegal. If a plane goes down... Harrington, if you want that promotion to VP Silas, you'll make the problem disappear. Sign the logs off as clean. Thorne. Pause. Fine. But I want double the stock options. The video ended. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. It was the silence of a tomb. Lord Harrington's face was the color of ash. He looked like he was having a stroke. Thorne was trembling. He backed away from the table, shaking his head. That's a deep fake AI. It's not real. It's real, Elena said, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. I have the original metadata. I also have the raw engine logs from the server room that prove you've been falsifying safety data for a year. You've been risking the lives of thousands of people to pump the stock price for a sale. Elena turned to the other board members, the ones who weren't in on the conspiracy. Gentlemen, she said, you have two choices. Choice A, I release this to the press, the FBI, and the FAA. The airline collapses, you all lose your investment, and you probably go to prison as accomplices. She leaned forward, placing her hands on the mahogany table. Or, choice B, Harrington and Thorne are removed immediately. They are handed over to the authorities for fraud and embezzlement. I take full control. We ground the fleet for safety inspections, which I will pay for out of my own pocket to save the brand's reputation as the safest airline in the world that cleans its own house. The stock will dip, but it will recover because we will be honest. She looked at Sterling. What's it going to be, gentlemen? Sterling looked at Harrington, who was slumped in his chair, defeated. He looked at Thorne, who was looking for an exit that didn't exist. Motion to remove Chairman Harrington, Sterling said, his voice shaking. Seconded, another member said quickly. Motion carried, Elena said. She picked up her phone. Officer Brady, you can come in now. The doors burst open. But it wasn't the London police. It was a team of fraud investigators from the Serious Fraud Office, SFO, accompanied by uniformed officers. They walked straight to Harrington. Lord Alistair Harrington, you are under arrest for securities fraud and conspiracy. Then they turned to Thorne. Thorne tried to run. He actually bolted for the side door. But the door opened before he reached it. Standing there was a massive man. It was the mechanic from the hangar, the one Thorne had bullied for years. The mechanic blocked the way. Thorne bounced off him. The officers grabbed Thorne, handcuffing his hands behind his back. Silas Thorne, the officer said, you are under arrest for criminal negligence and falsifying aviation records. Thorne looked at Elena as he was dragged out. His eyes were full desperate. Elena, please, I can fix this. I can testify against Harrington. Don't do this. Elena didn't even blink. Get off my plane, Silas, she whispered. As the doors closed on the screaming former captain, Elena looked around the table at the remaining terrified board members. Now, she said, sitting down and smoothing her suit. Let's talk about the new diversity training program, and let's get those engines fixed. The room was hers, the airline was hers, but the story wasn't quite over, because a story like this doesn't stay in the boardroom. It goes viral. 6 months later, John F. Kennedy International Airport looked different. The grey slush of winter had given way to the golden light of early summer, but the biggest change was at Gate B32. The Pinnacle Air logo had been refreshed. The staff looked happier. The tension that used to suffocate the terminal was gone. Eleanor Bishop stood at the window of the lounge, the same spot where she had been ignored half a year ago. Today, the lounge manager, Jessica, who had kept her job only after a rigorous retraining program, brought her a sparkling water without being asked. "Your flight to Tokyo is ready for boarding, Ms. Bishop," Jessica said with a genuine smile. "And Captain Mark is flying you today." "Thank you, Jessica." Elena walked down the jet bridge. She boarded the flagship Boeing 707. Seat 1A was waiting for her. As she settled in, she looked out the window at the tarmac below. The ground crew was loading luggage into the belly of the beast. It was hard, back-breaking work in the heat. One luggage handler in particular caught her eye. He was older than the others, his silver hair matted with sweat under a neon yellow safety vest. He was struggling with a heavy suitcase, his movements stiff and angry. It was Silas Thorne. After the trial, Thorne had lost everything. His pilot's license was permanently revoked by the FAA for falsifying safety records. His pension was seized to pay legal damages. His reputation was so toxic that no aviation company would let him near a cockpit. The only job he could get in the industry he loved was this, a baggage handler for a third-party contractor, loading the very planes he used to command. As if feeling her gaze, Thorne looked up. He squinted against the sun and saw the face in the window of seat 1A. Elena didn't smile. She didn't wave. She simply lowered her window shade. Inside the cockpit, Captain Mark's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard. We are looking at a beautiful day for flying. We'll be pushing back in just a moment. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride." Down on the tarmac, Silas Thorne watched the massive jet push back. The engines roared to life, blowing hot exhaust into his face, forcing him to turn away. He was grounded forever, left behind in the dust of his own arrogance, while the woman he underestimated soared into the clouds. And that is how the invisible woman in the hoodie took down an entire corrupt empire without ever raising her voice. Silas Thorne thought his uniform gave him power, but he learned the hard way that true power isn't about what you wear. It's about who you are. He judged Elena Bishop by her appearance, and in the end, he lost his wings while she owned the sky. It's a brutal reminder. Be careful who you step on while climbing the ladder, because you might meet them again on your way down, and they might just be the one holding the ladder. What would you have done if you were Elena? Would you have fired him on the spot, or did she handle it perfectly? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of high-flying justice, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new story. We have a crazy one coming up next week about a landlord who evicted a tenant only to realize she was his new judge. Thanks for watching.